Hello, night traveler. Have you ever wondered what truly lies hidden behind the dry pages of history, those events that seem to have fallen silent forever? We often think of history as a grand current of battles, mighty empires, and famous names. But tonight, we won't plunge into that whirlwind. There will be no trumpets blaring, no swords clashing. Instead, I invite you on a different journey. A trip into the whispers of the past, to a world where stories were never written in textbooks, secrets only told through the breath of time. It's a world of hidden subtlety, of forgotten rituals, of silent stone walls that have witnessed thousands of seasons of rain and sun, and of simple dreams on untamed lands. Close your eyes. Feel the peace spreading through this space. You don't need to remember. You don't need to analyze. Just listen. Listen to the echoes of gentle beauty, of quiet resilience, and of things that existed peacefully before the world became as hurried. As it is now, this is history not to be studied, but to be felt. So you can gently surrender to the flow of ancient tales, and so sleep will find you naturally, as calmly as time itself drifts by. A serene passage through a world of refinement. You find yourself in Kyoto, the bustling heart of ancient Japan, a city teeming with fragrant tea shops, busy rice merchants, wandering monks seeking enlightenment, and at least 4 people per block who are convinced they are reincarnated warlords. But for you, this world holds a far vaster expanse, and a young girl's destiny is often shaped from a very early age. Not the conventional path of a mundane marriage, nor the somber gates of a regretful monastic life. Your fate, chosen by those older than you, is to step into the Okiya, the house of the Geisha. You will dedicate the next 2 decades of your life to serving tea for tipsy aristocrats, all while pretending it is an empowering journey of artistic self-discovery. You are merely 6 years old. At this tender age, the world is still a boundless marvel where tiny beetles can command an entire afternoon of exploration, and deep afternoon naps are the purest form of joy. You are yet unaware that your parents have made a momentous decision. A decision that will utterly transform your carefree existence of sweet snacks and blissful slumber. Very soon, that life will be replaced by a rigorous education in emotional suppression. The Okiya stands before you. It doesn't resemble an ordinary home. It is more akin to a library that married a temple and raised a child that grew up to be emotionally distant. The woman who opens the door is Okasan, the geisha house mother. She is the kind of person who can discern your worth simply by the depth and grace of your bow. You attempt a small smile, but she offers none in return. Her face is a study in calm composure, hinting at decades of experience and quiet authority. Your parents bow deeply, murmur a few whispered words, and then depart, leaving you behind like a very polite, yet poignant, hostage exchange. You have been officially handed over. You are not adopted. You are now the property of the house. Do not worry, you will learn to curtsy through the trauma. You become a shikomi. It's a rather fancy word, but it simply means a child who scrubs things. Every day you will scrub floors until they gleam like polished mirrors, prepare hot baths, carry water from the well, and occasionally, silently, weep into your sleeve. Your primary duty is to observe the geisha, never to speak, but to absorb everything through osmosis, like a sponge soaking up water. You sleep in the cold hallway, you eat last, and you even owe the house for the rice you accidentally spilled. It is your first lesson in dependency and unspoken gratitude. The other geisha glide past you like ethereal beings, almost unreal. Their hair is elaborately sculpted into towering uptos. Their steps are light, almost soundless. Their gazes seem to say, "Don't even think about breathing too loudly. You are merely a walking sponge in wooden sandals, small and unseen. But you are watching, you are learning. And if your knees hold out, one day, you too might glide through a room without being told to fetch the towels. Your days begin before sunrise, when the sky is still a canvas of charcoal grey, and end when your back aches so much it ceases to feel. You sweep the soft tatami floors, stoke the charcoal fires, wash kimono fabric that costs more than your soul, and fetch things. Always fetching slippers, water, tea, more water, the good sandals, the other good sandals. By noon, you've walked more than most samurai march in a year, and heaven help you if you make a noise. Shukomi must be silent, silent like a haunted house, where only the whispers of the wind and fleeting shadows pass through. You are permitted to speak only when spoken to, and when addressed, you must reply quickly, but not too quickly, as that would be disrespectful. Also, never look directly at a senior geisha unless they are looking at you, and if they are, then you are looking too much. Frankly, blinking itself feels like a political act at this point. You receive no formal instruction. There are no classrooms, no textbooks. Your entire education is derived from observation, gentle but firm corrections, and repetition until everything becomes instinctual. You learn how to fold an obi by watching someone do it at lightning speed, like a magician. You practice bowing until your spine files a complaint from sheer exhaustion. You try not to cry during your 15th failed tea pour, but somehow you begin to understand. You perceive the subtle way they hold the fan, just so, not to open, not to closed. How laughter is timed like a drumbeat, perfectly placed to ease the atmosphere. How walking is a choreography of toes and impeccable timing. You realize that being a geisha is not just about outward beauty. It is about absolute precision, self-control, and possessing the social reflexes of a diplomat navigating a landmine. Factory, where every word, every gesture, can have profound consequences, and yet you are still just a shikomi. You are invisible until you are useful, and even then, you remain somewhat invisible. Though now, with a cleaning rag in your hand, the older girls might be kind if you are lucky, or they might treat you as a living cautionary tale. Either way, you keep your head down and your ears open, because here is the secret. Everyone started here. Even the most graceful, impossibly poised geisha in the house once scrubbed this exact floor while being yelled at for drying chopsticks the wrong way. So, you endure quietly, and you wait for your chance to stop mopping and start mattering. Now that you've mastered the fine art of carrying tea and elegantly not existing, it's time to upgrade your skill set. No, not dancing or playing instruments. Don't get ahead of yourself. First, you must learn how to sit for hours without fidgeting or breathing too enthusiastically. Welcome to posture training, the ancient, highly respected Japanese tradition of turning your knees into pretzels and your spine into bamboo. You kneel in seiza, the formal sitting position where your legs are folded neatly beneath you. Your back is straight, and your circulation quietly gives up. At first, your legs go numb after 3 minutes. Then they start whispering threats. After 10, your entire lower body has legally declared mutiny. But you're not allowed to shift or stretch or scream, because geisha are graceful. They do not wince. They do not wiggle. They endure pain as if it were an aesthetic choice. You also begin bowing constantly. There are dozens of ways to bow, each with subtle variations. A greeting bow, a gratitude bow, an apology bow, a please don't punish me for existing bow. You learn to lower your head to precisely the right angle, hold it for precisely the right number of seconds, and rise with a smoothness normally reserved for rice paper unfolding in a gentle breeze. Of course, you'll mess it up. Everyone does. You'll bow too fast or too shallow, or horror of horrors. Touch the floor with the tips of your fingers at the wrong exact angle. Someone will scold you with the gentle intensity of a disappointed ghost. You also study how to sit during tea ceremonies. Your knees must remain folded even when your soul yearns to escape your body. You must move as if you were underwater, slow, fluid, deliberate. If you sneeze, congratulations, you've just dishonored your ancestors. But somewhere between the cramping and the internal screaming, something happens. You start to hold your head higher, your movements become quieter, more deliberate. You become less child, more shadow. This is where you begin to understand. Geisha training isn't about theatrics. It's about control over your voice, over your body, over how the world perceives you. You are learning how to vanish beautifully. Asterisk after years of floor scrubbing, knee torture, and developing the posture of a demure statue. You finally hear the words you've been longing for. You're ready to become a Mako. It's like being told you've been promoted from ghost to an ornamental human being, filled with exquisite beauty. Congratulations, you are now a Mako, an apprentice geisha, which means, ironically, the real suffering is just beginning but now. It is adorned in splendor. First stop, the hair. Your head will now be transformed into a living sculpture. Professional hairstylists arrive with lacquer, wax, pins, and a worrying sense of calm. They twist your hair into the iconic Nihongami, styler towering, complex arrangement that takes hours to create, and approximately one poorly timed sneeze to utterly destroy. And you can't sleep lying down anymore. No, you must use a wooden neck pillow designed to keep your head elevated so your precious hair doesn't touch anything, especially common sense. Sleeping like this is a test of willpower and neck strength. You get used to it, sort of. Eventually, maybe now, comes the outfit. Your new kimono is an embroidered masterpiece. It's gorgeous, heavy, and clearly designed by someone who harbored a strong dislike for shoulders. The sleeves are long enough to sweep a small garden. The obi sash is tied in an elaborate knot that sits halfway up your back and weighs about as much as a toddler. Getting dressed each day requires help, often from 2 or 3 other people who have memorized the ancient art of wrapping fabric around the human body until it's 75% kimono and 25% regret. Then there are the kanzashi, your hair ornaments. These are beautiful, seasonal, and sharp enough to qualify as light weaponry. You wear them like a crown, but they also broadcast your rank and training stage. One wrong hairpin, and everyone in the room knows you've committed a fashion crime punishable by shame. As a Mako, your job is to watch, imitate, and occasionally serve tea while dressed like a sentient cherry blossom. You're not allowed to speak too freely, laugh too loudly, or, heaven forbid, ask questions. You are art, not commentary. But, despite the discomfort, the aching scalp, and the inability to sneeze near flames, you feel something else. You're not invisible anymore. People notice you. And not just because your outfit is visible from orbit. There's no single aha moment where you wake up and think, yes, I am now a proper apprentice geisha. It's more like a slow, ceremonial promotion wrapped in silk, incense, and low-grade stress. Asterisk, but the official day you debut as a Mako, that's different. That day comes with ceremony and pressure, yet also profound pride. Think of it as the Edo period version of a debutante ball, except instead of dancing and punch, there's kneeling, sweating, and at least 2 full hours of hairstyling with hot wax. You've trained for years, bowed more than a religious statue, and memorized the complicated way to pour tea without looking like you're actually pouring tea. Now, finally, you get to show your face painted white, of course to elite, and they are judging you, politely, intensely, quietly, with folding fans. You wear your most elaborate kimono yet, layers of vibrant silk that cost more than your birth family's home. It's so long it drags behind you like a very expensive regret, yet also a profound statement of beauty. Your obi is tied in the Darari style, a long, trailing sash that seems to whisper, "Yes, I'm new here. Please admire my suffering and grace." Asterisk, your face is fully painted now. Thick white rice powder from forehead to neck. Red and black accents on your eyes, carefully applied with a brush so thin it could paint on rice grains. One twitch and you've gone from elegant apprentice to haunted raccoon, which is why meticulousness is paramount. And then the lips. As a junior Mako, you're only allowed to paint the bottom lip. Why? Tradition. Also something vague about modesty and not getting too full of yourself. You paint it red, carefully shaped like a tiny bow. It's considered beautiful. It also makes eating look like a complicated art installation. Mistakes are not tolerated. Smudge your lip. Start over. Uneven eyeliner. Unacceptable. Eyeliner doesn't even exist yet. You're using powdered minerals mixed with spit and despair. Once you're done, you look in the mirror and see something both ancient and terrifying. A doll. A glowing white, fragile, beautiful doll with the core strength of a dancer and the daily calorie intake of a squirrel. But here's the thing. Beneath the mask, you're learning power. This look commands attention. It says, "I'm tradition wrapped in performance, and I will judge your clumsy chopstick technique." The makeup isn't for vanity, it's armor. It separates you from ordinary women. It tells everyone that you're here to perform, not participate. It also tells your pores that they are no longer needed. You don't wear this face for yourself. You wear it so others forget you're only 15 and start treating you like art at first glance. You might think the geisha's greatest tools are her beauty, her kimono, or possibly the sharp metal hairpin she keeps purely for decorative purposes. But you'd be wrong. Her real weapons are twofold: the shamisen and the ancient Japanese art of making awkward. Men feel interesting. You learn the shamisen, a 3-stringed instrument that looks like a weaponized spatula and sounds like a melancholy banjo playing. It requires grace, rhythm, and fingers that don't cramp like salted squid. You practice for hours daily, producing noises that begin as a cat in distress and gradually evolve into respectable ambience. Your teachers are merciless. 1 missed note earns you a sigh. 2 missed notes earn you a raised eyebrow. 3 missed notes and you're sent back to tune the instrument until it sounds less like a kitchen accident. But music is only half the equation. The other half, conversation. You're not just learning how to talk. You're learning how to talk around things, how to flatter without lying, how to suggest without promising, how to keep a man engaged in dialogue without letting him realize that you're mentally organizing tomorrow's dance routine while nodding politely. You practice subtlety like it's a martial art. If a client mentions he's rich, you smile softly and change the topic to the moon. If he tries to flirt too boldly, you compliment his taste in sandals and offer more. You are the queen of graceful deflection. And oh, the poetry. You memorize hundreds of poems about flowers, rivers, and heartbreak. You can quote Geisha while pouring tea and still have enough bandwidth to notice who's had too much to drink, all while keeping your back straight and your voice one octave higher than your internal screaming. By now, you've realized that being a Mako isn't about simply entertaining. It's about managing emotion your own, your clients, and the room's. You read moods faster than you read syllables. You know when to laugh, when to pause, and when to pretend you didn't hear something horrifying. This is your new life. Half musician, half therapist, all performance. And the scary part, you're getting really good at it. Asterisk now. We shall unveil a more intimate facet of a geisha's life. A complex relationship that sometimes forms the very foundation of their existence and progression. The concept of the dana, the word itself sounds elegant, vaguely mysterious, and just polite enough to obscure its true meaning. It refers to a wealthy male patron who supports your career with threads of obligation woven so tightly they could double as a noose. You hear about the dana concept early on. A dana, they say, is a respected man who appreciates the arts, funds your training, and helps with the extravagant costs of kimonos, hair ornaments, and general survival. In return, you're expected to keep him company, make him feel important, and ideally, not run screaming into the night. This is not romance. This is not a Jane Austen novel. This is a business transaction cloaked in a silk robe. You do not get to choose your dana. The okia chooses. Your Okusan weighs reputation, wealth, and social connections, like a sommelier sniffing out aged insecurity. You, meanwhile, are told to smile and pretend the man in front of you, who is 40 years your senior and breathes like a tired ox, is utterly fascinating. To be clear, not every dana expects certain favors. Some are genuine patrons of the arts, who simply enjoy the company of a well-trained, clever woman who can discuss poetry and politics without crying or interrupting. Others are not. The boundaries are vague, culturally unspoken, and the pressure is immense. You owe your house. You owe your future. You owe your knees, which are currently throbbing under another 10 pounds of fabric. And so you learn the art of emotional balancing. You keep things light, friendly, respectful. You become a master of making men feel adored, while keeping your soul safely sealed behind a smile. If emotional labor were taxable, you'd bankrupt the shogunate. Sometimes it works out. A dana might sponsor you for years, shielding you from financial ruin and providing just enough distance to keep things bearable. Other times, you develop the lifelong ability to dissociate in real time while nodding at a story about grain taxes for the 15th time. Either way, the system isn't about love, it's about leverage, and the only way to survive it is to learn how to tilt the balance back in your favor, all while wearing 3 layers of brocade and pretending the room isn't on fire. Asterisk, the okia may appear serene paper walls, soft lighting, the gentle strum of a shamisen floating through the air. But do not be fooled. It's a battlefield, though not one with swords or shouting. No, geisha wars are quieter, sharper, like being slowly assassinated with compliments. Every geisha house is a carefully managed ecosystem, and within it lies a secret jungle of hierarchy, rivalry, and petty vengeance served in silk. You are surrounded by women who are smart, competitive, and trained to smile through open warfare. Did someone borrow your obi without asking? Oh, how thoughtful. Did another Mako arrive at dinner with the same seasonal hairpin? How coincidental. Did your shamisen solo suddenly get reassigned to someone else last minute? Just a misunderstanding, the kind that somehow always benefits. The more popular girl, you learn quickly. Not all smiles are kind. Not all compliments are real. And never, never leave your cosmetics unattended. There's a code, of course. You don't scream or slap. That's for the untrained. Here, revenge is served with poise. One extra syllable in a haiku. One wrong step pointed out politely during practice. A subtle whisper to a client that maybe, just maybe, you heard something interesting about that other Mako's behavior at the last tea ceremony. Rumors in the okia spread faster than fire on a paper lantern. You try to stay above it, of course, but eventually you'll get pulled in. Maybe you're the new favorite. Maybe your dance was too good. Maybe someone's just in a mood, and suddenly your sandals are missing. Coincidence? Surely, you survive by learning to be gracious strategically. You master the art of complimenting someone while subtly implying the opposite. Your new kimono is so bold, I could never wear something so daring. Eventually, you'll rise above it literally. As a full geisha, you'll outrank the apprentices and get your own room, your own clients, and fewer accidental spills on your outfit. But until then, welcome to fan wars. They're silent, they're ruthless, and they're fought with grace, timing, and an occasional well-placed eyebrow raise. You don't need armor here. You need a mirror, a memory, and the ability to say thank you like it's a warning. After years of kneeling, bowing, smiling, and resisting the urge to scream into your obi, the day arrives. You are no longer a Mako. You are now a geisha. The transformation is subtle. No dramatic parade, no congratulatory fireworks. You simply wake up one day and, instead of being the girl in training, you are the standard everyone else is training toward. And, strangely, your knees still hurt. Your wardrobe changes. Gone are the vividly colored, high-sleeved Mako kimonos that made you look like a walking flower arrangement. Your new look is more subdued, more elegant, as if you've finally earned the right to dress like someone with opinions. Your hair, thank the gods, is no longer a weekly sculpture made from wax and willpower. You now wear a wig. Yes, a wig. It's heavier than your head and still takes half a salon and a miracle to style. But at least you can sleep like a normal human again, which is to say poorly and on a futon. But the biggest shift, you now perform alone. You no longer follow. You lead. You're expected to host, entertain, and charm without assistance. Your shamisen solos are longer. Your conversations are wittier. You must be calm, poised, and above all, in control. Clients no longer see you as merely cute. They see you as powerful. Not in a sword-wielding, castle-burning way, but in the way that a single raised eyebrow can derail an entire conversation. You've mastered subtlety. You've weaponized grace. People listen when you speak. Or rather, when you choose to speak. Because geisha know the true art of power, silence used sparingly. And with this new status come new burdens. You must mentor the younger Mako. You must smile at clients you've already smiled at 1,000 times. You must carry the weight of legacy, of expectation, of thousands of years of cultural performance. But deep down, something's different now. You're no longer pretending. You've become the person the okia sculpted you into. Not just a woman in a kimono, but a living symbol of refinement, mystery, and perfectly calculated emotional labor. You are no longer in training. You are the tradition. Ancient vows whispered through time. We've glided through the refined world of the geisha, where every gesture is a dance, every word a work of art. Now, let your mind drift to another facet of ancient life, where the bonds were even deeper than artistic performance, marriage. These aren't tales of romantic love as we often imagine, but of vows woven from duty, from the continuity of family lines, and from the very breath of the cosmos itself. Let's begin our journey in ancient Sumer, the cradle of civilization, where marriage was less about romance and more about record-keeping. Love was optional, contracts were not. The Sumerians, who lived over 4,000 years ago in what is now southern Iraq, were the first people we know of to formalize marriage with written agreements. And by written, we mean pressed into wet clay using a stylus. These weren't declarations of eternal affection. They were binding economic transactions. The cuneiform tablet often spelled out exactly what each party was bringing into the union. And no, unconditional love was never one of the listed assets. The bride came with a dowry, livestock, textiles, servants, or land. The groom's family might toss in a bride price, which was less a gesture of goodwill and more of a deposit. If the marriage failed, the tablet made it clear what was forfeited, refunded, or repossessed. Yes, Sumerian marriages came with early versions of prenups. Your love life could be audited, but the Sumerians didn't stop at cold transactions. Marriage was a cornerstone of maintaining social order. Women were expected to be loyal and fertile. Men were expected to provide and protect, or at least not embarrass the family at public rituals. Infidelity, especially by the wife, could be punished harshly, including death by drowning. Divorce was allowed, but only if you could prove just, 'cause we grew apart wouldn't cut it. Weddings themselves were modest affairs. No Instagram-worthy decor or white veils. The couple would move in together and perform rituals, possibly invoking deities like Inanna or Enlil. But the real marriage began when the community recognized the union and the contract was filed like an ancient tax return. The Sumerians viewed marriage less as a personal journey and more as a civil duty. Your union was a cog in the machinery of inheritance, agriculture, and divine order. Your spouse, a partner in social strategy, a teammate in a world where surviving floods and feeding goats took precedence over candlelit poetry. Now, let's journey to ancient Egypt, where marriage wasn't just sanctioned by society, it was mirrored. In the heavens, their gods themselves were married. Isis and Osiris, Nut and Geb, even chaos had a soulmate. Egyptians believed that divine pairs maintained cosmic balance, and human marriages were expected to do the same. That's a lot of pressure for a couple trying to keep the household cats from eating the sacred grain. Marriage was seen as the ideal social state. A man was expected to marry young, ideally before he could do too much damage as a bachelor. Women married in their early teens, and while love may not have been the focus, companionship and affection were valued. Egyptian love poetry was surprisingly tender. One poem reads, "My heart flutters hastily when I think of you." Another says, "She has stolen my heart with her hair." Not exactly Tinder bios, but it's something. Legal documents were often involved, especially among the upper class. Like the Sumerians, the Egyptians used contracts with clear stipulations about property, dowries, and divorce terms. But unlike Sumer, Egyptian women had notable legal rights. They could own property, initiate divorce, and sue their husbands for neglect. Queen or not, an Egyptian woman could drag her husband to court if he failed to provide bread, beer, or crucially, oil. Incestuous marriage was another curiosity, especially among royals. Pharaohs routinely married their sisters. The reason? To emulate the gods. Just as Isis married her brother Osiris, a royal union between siblings was believed to preserve divine bloodlines. Sacred genes, along with a side of genetic risk. Wedding ceremonies themselves weren't elaborate. There was no priestly blessing or public spectacle. A couple was considered married once they moved in together and cohabited. That's it. No doves, no cake, and certainly no throwing of bouquets. The gods didn't need fanfare to approve. Children were the central goal of marriage. Not love, not partnership, not personal fulfillment, just heirs. The more, the better. If your wife couldn't conceive, you might take a concubine or marry a second woman. Love was optional. Lineage was essential. Now, let's pause our journey in Egypt and gently move to other lands, where marriage vows took on different meanings, sometimes as peculiar arrangements, a harmony with nature, or a silent contract, background sound, gentle wind rustling through grain fields, faint sounds of crickets, voice maintaining a soothing, even pace. In most ancient cultures, marriage was a family affair, but in Sparta it was a military operation. If Sumerian marriage was a business deal and Egyptian marriage a divine mimicry, then Spartan marriage was a survival tactic wrapped in state propaganda and six-pack abs. Here's how it worked. Spartan boys were taken from their families at age 7 and tossed into the agouge, the brutal training system designed to produce elite warriors who could kill with a spoon and eat raw roots without flinching. Girls, meanwhile, were also trained in wrestling, javelin throwing, and sarcastic one-liners. The idea wasn't just strength for strength's sake. It was about producing healthy offspring. A weak child was a liability. A strong child was a future. Spartan marriage wasn't about candlelight or meeting the one. It was state-mandated breeding. The state even scheduled the ideal marriage age. Around 34 men, early teens for women. Romantic? No. The wedding ceremony was as strange as you'd expect from people who thought iron bars made good currency. Here's how it went. The bride's head was shaved, and she was dressed in a man's cloak and sandals. Then she was left alone in a dark room. The groom would sneak in at night, consummate the marriage, and then sneak back out before sunrise, returning to his all-male barracks. Yes, even after marriage, Spartan men didn't live with their wives. The relationship was built on secrecy and quick visits, like ancient Tinder with a curfew. Why all the cloak and dagger? The idea was to keep desire alive. Too much familiarity might make men soft, and softness had no place in Sparta. The mystery kept the spark going, or so their logic went. Though modern therapists might have questions. Despite the odd rituals, Spartan women had more power than most ancient counterparts. They could own land, run estates, and insult men in public without being executed. Love poems weren't popular, but wit was. Spartan women were famously shy. One famously told her husband, "Come back with your shield or on it." That's basically the ancient Greek version of "Don't embarrass me." Continuing our journey, let's arrive in ancient India, where marriage was more than a personal union. It was a sacred duty, a spiritual journey governed by Dharma, the cosmic law. Rooted in the Vedic tradition, marriage was considered one of the key rites of passage, a samskara necessary for fulfilling one's responsibilities to family, ancestors, and society. Marriage was not entered into lightly. It wasn't merely a contract between two individuals, but a bond between two families, two lineages, and sometimes two entire villages. It was meant to uphold Varna Dharma, the social and moral order, ensuring stability through caste alignment, ritual propriety, and mutual obligation. Arranged marriages were the norm, and horoscopes played a central role in matching partners. Astrologers examined the alignment of stars and planets to determine compatibility. The idea was that cosmic harmony would lead to earthly peace. A good match was believed to bring prosperity not just to the couple but to the entire household. The wedding ceremony was a complex symbolic ritual centered around Agni, the sacred fire. The couple would walk 7 steps, the Saptapadi, around the fire, taking vows at each step to nourish one another, to grow in strength, to share in wealth, to be righteous, to raise strong children, to enjoy the seasons of life together, and to remain lifelong companions. With these steps, the two were considered spiritually united. The wife, known as Grihapatni or Sahadamini, was expected to be both a partner and a moral guide. She managed the household, performed religious duties, and was central to preserving the family's ritual purity. Her role, though domestic, was seen as spiritually vital. The husband was expected to protect, provide, and uphold Dharma through his own conduct. Polygamy existed, especially among the elite, but monogamy was considered ideal. Widows were expected to lead a life of austerity, although practices varied over time and region. The controversial custom of sati, where a widow self-immolated on her husband's pyre, was rare in ancient times and emerged much later, largely outside Vedic ideals. Now, we will conclude this leg of our journey with another Eastern culture, where harmony with nature and ancestors shaped the meaning of marriage. In ancient China, marriage was not a private affair. It was a deeply structured institution rooted in Confucian principles, ancestral worship, and family hierarchy. To marry was not simply to fall in love or to raise a family. It was to honor the past and secure the future under the ever-watchful eyes of both the living and the dead. The primary purpose of marriage was the continuity of the family line. Filial piety, Shao demanded that a son marry and produce male heirs to maintain ancestral rights. If a man failed to do so, he not only disappointed his parents, but risked disrupting the family's spiritual duties. Ancestors had to be fed and honored. A childless home was a broken chain in the lineage, a cause for shame and cosmic imbalance. Marriage decisions were never made by the young couple. Families employed matchmakers who negotiated the terms, inspected backgrounds, and consulted astrological charts. A marriage without proper celestial alignment was considered risky. Compatibility wasn't about chemistry, but about heavenly timing and earthly duty. The 6 rites of traditional Chinese marriage reflected this ceremonial complexity. It began with a proposal, then name exchange, divination, betrothal, gifts, setting, the date, and finally the ceremony itself. Each step involved rituals, symbolism, and precise communication between families, a process that could take months, even years. On the wedding day, the bride wore red, the color of joy and luck, and traveled in a decorated sedan chair to the groom's house. She was veiled, silent, and ceremonially passive. Upon arrival, the couple bowed 3 times, to heaven and earth, to the parents, and finally to each other. These bows signified the order of loyalty. Cosmos first, then family, then self. Once married, the wife entered her husband's household and was expected to obey his parents as her own. Her duty was to bear sons, manage domestic affairs, and serve quietly, while some women gained respect with age or motherhood. Their position remained within a clearly defined patriarchal framework. Divorce was rare and shameful. A man could dismiss his wife for disobedience or infertility, but a woman had no such right. The marriage bond, though revered, was unbalanced in power. Now, we will continue our journey to another empire where marriage held the meaning of a civic institution. In ancient Rome, marriage was not simply a personal milestone. It was a civic institution intertwined with law, class, and public duty. Romans treated marriage as a reflection of the social order where alliances were forged. Property was transferred, and lineage was preserved under the watchful gaze of the state and the paterfamilias, the male head of the household. Marriage in Rome was categorized into different legal forms. The most traditional was cum manu, where the wife left her family and came under the legal authority or manus of her husband or his father. She was no longer legally part of her natal family and became akin to a daughter in her husband's household. Her property became his. This form, however, gradually faded in favor of sin manu, in which the wife remained under the authority of her father and retained greater legal independence. This shift reflected evolving attitudes and the increasing economic power of elite Roman women. Marriage ceremonies were marked by ritual and symbolism. The bride wore a flame-colored veil called the flammeum, and her hair was parted into 6 locks with a spear nod to tradition and the martial roots of Roman culture. The joining of hands, dextrum junctio, symbolized the union, and offerings were made to household gods, especially Juno, the goddess of marriage. A formal procession led the bride to her new home, where she was welcomed with fire and water, emblems of purity and life. For Roman elites, marriage was a political tool. Senators and nobles used marriages to cement alliances and secure influence. Personal affection, while not irrelevant, was often secondary. Even emperors arranged marriages for political leverage, frequently disregarding their own preferences. Women in Roman marriages were expected to be modest, loyal, and dedicated to running the household. However, Roman women, especially under sin manu marriages, could own property, inherit wealth, and even initiate divorce. Divorce was common and socially acceptable, provided it was handled with dignity. Ubi to Gaius, ibi, ego Gaia, where you are, Gaius, I am Gaia, was the bride's vow. But if things soured, parting ways was often as swift as declaring intent before witnesses. Our journey through ancient marriage history is slowly concluding, but echoes still linger from sacred lands and relationships woven from nature itself. *4. The ancient Hebrews, marriage was not just a social contract. It was a sacred covenant guided by divine law. Rooted in the traditions of the Hebrew Bible, marriage was a cornerstone of religious life, lineage, and moral order. It was a relationship that reflected not only human connection, but also the enduring bond between the people of Israel and their God. Marriage was viewed as essential to fulfilling the commandment to be fruitful and multiply. It was expected of all men, and early marriage was the norm. Love, while valued, was not the foundation. Obedience to God and duty to family took precedence. A proper marriage preserved tribal identity, secured inheritance rights, and maintained the purity of the community. Arranged marriages were standard, negotiated between families with a focus on kinship ties reputation, and property. A bride price mohar was paid by the groom to the bride's family, not as a purchase, but as a formal gesture of commitment and compensation. Women often married in their early teens, while men were slightly older, having established the means to support a household. Ceremonies were domestic affairs, often taking place in the bride's home, and followed by a celebratory feast. The rituals emphasized joy, continuity, and blessings with wine, singing, and the reading of sacred texts. A written ketubah, or marriage contract, outlined the husband's responsibilities to provide food, clothing, and conjugal rights. It also protected the wife's financial interests in case of divorce or widowhood. Though patriarchy defined much of Hebrew society, women held an honored position within the family structure. The woman of valor, described in Proverbs, was wise, industrious, and respected. While polygamy existed, especially among early patriarchs like Abraham and Jacob, monogamy became more common over time, particularly after the Babylonian exile. Divorce was permitted, but discouraged. A man could issue a get, a writ of divorce, under certain conditions. However, this process required religious approval and was subject to legal limitations, ensuring that the woman was not left vulnerable or dishonored. Finally, let's visit the ancient South, where marriage was a deeply communal and symbolic act woven into the rhythms of the natural world, tribal allegiance, and ancestral law. It was less a static institution and more a fluid, adaptable bond shaped by personal choice, social duty, and seasonal rituals. Unlike the rigid legal codes of Rome or the cosmic obligations of India, Celtic marriage customs varied widely across tribes and regions, from Ireland to Gaul to the Scottish Highlands. Yet, some common threads endured: partnership, fertility, and honor. The Celts viewed marriage as a sacred oath, often sworn in the presence of tribal elders, druids, and the ever-present gods of land and sky. Marriage could be monogamous or polygynous, depending on wealth and status. Among nobles and chieftains, it was not uncommon for a man to have multiple wives, each with her own household standing. However, this was governed by clear expectations and mutual agreement. Women were not passive figures. Celtic women often had legal rights, including property ownership, divorce, and even the ability to initiate marriage. One striking feature of Celtic union was the trial marriage, a year and a day arrangement where couples could live together before deciding whether to continue the relationship permanently. If either partner was dissatisfied, they could walk away without stigma. This custom, far ahead of its time, emphasized consent and compatibility over permanence for its own sake. Ceremonies often coincided with seasonal festivals like Beltane, a fire rite marking the beginning of summer and fertility. Couples would leap over flames or pass between bonfires to symbolize purification and union. These rites were believed to bless the marriage with strength, fruitfulness, and harmony with nature. Marriage contracts, especially among elites, were formalized and could include clauses about dowries, shared property, and inheritance. Unlike many ancient societies, Celtic law recognized mutual responsibilities between spouses. Abuse or neglect could be grounds for dissolution, and women had recourse in tribal courts. The spiritual dimension of Celtic marriage was ever present. Vows were not just personal, they were bound to the earth, the tribe, and the gods. The couple's union was a thread in the larger tapestry of land and lineage, and their fidelity was a promise not only to each other, but to the sacred balance that held the world together And so, we've journeyed through the whispered marriage vows from ancient Sumer, through Egypt, Sparta, India, China, Japan, and Rome, and finally, to the nature-bound commitments of the Celts, each place a unique story, each vow a distinct meaning, yet all woven together into the rich tapestry of human connection and belief. In a new beginning, let these ancient tales gently lull your mind. Let the stillness of vows that echoed through millennia guide you into slumber. The silent shapes of forgotten fortresses, asterisk from the whispered vows of ancient marriages. Let us now shift our gaze. Allow your mind to gently drift to a place where grandeur was built, not with a sword, but with red brick, a structure standing defiantly against the tides of time. Malberg Castle. This is not a tale of thunderous battles, but of architectural endurance, of stories preserved within the quiet steadfastness of stone and brick. Asterisk, imagine yourself in the lands of Northern Europe, where the late 13th century witnessed the rise of an extraordinary will to build. From the flat plains of the Vistula Delta, Malberg Castle emerged, defiant and unmistakable. This was a fortress constructed not of typical stone, but of brick, the bold, distinctive material of the north. In an age where most castles clung to limestone and granite, Malborg's red Gothic walls radiated both innovation and an imposing might. The Teutonic Knights didn't merely desire a stronghold. They envisioned a sacred fortress where warfare and worship could coexist. The castle's layout reflects this duality. The complex was built in 3 distinct sections: the High Castle, the Middle Castle, and the Lower Castle. Each section was walled and fortified, each serving its own specific purpose. Let us gently step into the High Castle, the spiritual core of the entire edifice. Here stood the chapel, the chapter house, and the monks' living quarters. This was where the knights resided, prayed, and strategized. The architecture was meticulously designed with religious symbolism in mind. Narrow windows allowed filtered light to stream through, casting long shadows on cold stone floors. Vaulted ceilings soared like cathedral arches. Even defensive features doubled as spiritual metaphors. Height symbolized closeness to God, while darkness and light represented divine truth against the chaos beyond the walls. Malberg wasn't just intended to endure sieges, it was meant to inspire awe. Asterisk, the Church of the Blessed Virgin Mary, nestled within the High Castle, featured stained glass, intricate tile work, and a towering statue of the Virgin Mary overlooking the outer walls. Every turret, every passageway, every tower was laid out with deliberate intent. Nothing was wasted, nothing left to chance. Even the latrines were ingeniously designed to drain into the Nogat River, a subtle reminder that the knights brought order and cleanliness to a land they perceived as wild and unconverted. As the 14th century dawned, Malberg continued its expansion. Craftsmen, labourers, and stonemasons toiled year-round. Local peasants were often conscripted to provide food, timber, and manpower. Meanwhile, the fortress became the administrative and spiritual nucleus of the growing Teutonic state. More than just a castle, Malberg was a statement, a sermon in brick and mortar, declaring that the order was here to stay both as warriors and as monks. It was faith clad in armor, a monastery wrapped in battlements, and it had only just begun to grow. Asterisk throughout the 14th century, Malberg Castle was no longer simply a military base. It had evolved into the epicenter of a burgeoning theocratic empire. From this formidable brick bastion, the Teutonic Knights extended their control across the Baltic. transforming what began as a campaign of conversion into a full-scale colonization of territory, people, and resources. The order operated as a blend of a kingdom and a corporation. Its Grand Master, essentially both Pope and King within his domain, ruled from Malberg with the aid of a strict monastic hierarchy. Beneath him were knights, priests, and lay brothers, all bound by vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, yet collectively managing vast estates, trade routes, and tax systems. Their objective wasn't solely religious. It was territorial consolidation. Forests were cleared, towns were built, and paganism was driven underground or eradicated. Malberg served as both the symbolic and logistical heart of this endeavor. Here, the chapter house convened to deliberate on policies, elect new Grand Masters, and decide on matters of war and diplomacy. The castle's fortified treasury guarded gold, silver, and relics, all acquired through tithes, trade, or conquest. Its armories supplied swords and armor for new crusades into Lithuania and beyond, with its influence swelling. The order styled itself as a civilizing force. Roads and bridges were constructed. Trade flourished along the Vistula River. German settlers were encouraged to migrate, establishing towns with Gothic cathedrals and markets modeled on the Holy Roman Empire. The region became known not for its pagan past, but for its rigid order under the strict rule of the Black Cross. Yet even the most formidable walls cannot withstand the relentless currents of time and political shifts. By the 15th century, the power of the Teutonic Knights began to wane. Neighboring nations, particularly Poland and Lithuania, had united and challenged the order's dominance. The Battle of Grunwald in 1410 delivered a severe blow, though Malberg itself would withstand the subsequent siege. The Siege of Malberg in 1410 was a notable event. Despite their crushing defeat at Grunwald, the knights retreated to their fortress. The combined Polish-Lithuanian army under King Władysław II Jagiello laid siege to the castle for many weeks. However, Malberg, with its intricate defensive system and ample supplies, proved to be an indomitable opponent. Despite being surrounded, the brick walls stood firm, as resilient as the will of its defenders. Eventually, the siege was lifted, but this victory was merely a reprieve. The order was weakened, and Malberg was no longer perceived as truly invincible. In 1457, during the 13 Years' War, Malberg finally fell to Polish control, but not by force. The order, financially exhausted and abandoned by its mercenaries, sold the castle to King Casimir IV, Jagiellon of Poland. It was an undramatic end for a magnificent fortress, yet a poignant reminder that even the most formidable structures can be brought low by the weight of debt and the shifting tides of power. After its transfer to Polish rule, Malberg underwent a transformation. It became one of the royal residences of the Polish kings, a symbol of Polish ascendancy in the north. Although no longer a military stronghold of a monastic order, it retained its strategic significance and was used for ceremonies, conferences, and as a repository for important documents. Chapels were converted, rooms were redecorated, and the castle adapted to its new role. It witnessed the rise and fall of dynasties, changes in policy, and the evolution of a nation. Later, in the late 18th century, with the partitions of Poland, Malberg fell into Prussian hands. It suffered neglect and was utilized as a grain warehouse and military barracks, its Gothic beauty obscured by indifference. But Malberg was not entirely forgotten. In the 19th century, a Gothic revival movement sparked renewed interest in the castle. Architects and historians recognized its immense importance and embarked on painstaking restoration efforts. The castle was meticulously rebuilt, brick by brick, striving to restore its original grandeur. This work continued through the World Wars, and even after suffering significant damage in World War II, Malberg was once again painstakingly rebuilt from its ruins. Now, let your mind envision the towering red brick walls, the silent corridors, and the spires that reach towards the night sky. Malberg is no longer a fortress of war, but a silent witness to time, to change, and to enduring resilience. It stands there, not to fight, but to remember, to whisper the stories of centuries long past, allow the steadfastness of these ancient walls, the peace of their deserted corridors, and the endurance of a structure that has transcended time to gently guide your thoughts. Let the whispered tales of brick and stone carry you into a deep slumber. Asterisk. The whispers of the wild frontier and distant dreams. Asterisk. We've journeyed through ancient rituals and gazed upon the silent grandeur of forgotten fortresses. Now, let your mind wander to a vast land where dreams were woven from sheer will and resilience. We will arrive at the American frontier in the early 19th century, not to witness loud conquests, but to feel the breath of a wild land and to hear the whispered stories of the courageous souls who faced the immensity of nature. Asterisk. In the early 1800s, the United States was a young nation with restless ambitions. Its eastern cities were growing, but for many Americans, the real promise lay beyond the Appalachian Mountains, in the vast, untamed wilderness of the West. This desire to expand was more than a personal impulse. It was wrapped in a national philosophy known as manifest destiny, the belief that Americans were destined by providence or purpose to settle from the Atlantic to the Pacific, no matter what or who stood in the way. What began as a trickle of brave homesteaders soon swelled into a mass movement. By wagon, horseback, and on foot, thousands of families ventured into the frontier, drawn by the hope of cheap land, fresh opportunity, and the chance to escape debt, poverty, or overcrowded cities. Land grants, homesteading laws, and glowing newspaper editorials promised fertile soil, freedom and ownership, all waiting for the bold to claim. But the journey west was not for the faint of heart. Pioneers faced weeks, even months, of grueling travel. Trails like the Oregon Trail, Santa Fe Trail, and California Trail became lifelines across mountains, rivers, and plains. Supplies were packed tightly into wagons, which served as both transportation and temporary homes. Dangers lurked everywhere. River crossings, animal attacks, broken axles, and disease could strike without warning. And yet, the pull of the West remained irresistible. For many, the idea of carving out a piece of the frontier was more than a land grab. It was a shot at reinvention. A poor tenant farmer could become a landowner. An immigrant with no inheritance could start anew. On the frontier, there were no neighbors to impress, no aristocracy to navigate only raw land and the will to tame it. Asterisk. Once the journey west was completed, it was completed at all the real work began. The American frontier did not welcome settlers with ready-made homes or planted fields. It offered only trees, soil, weather, and time. For pioneers, establishing a homestead meant transforming raw wilderness into a space that could sustain life, starting with the most basic necessity, shelter. A log cabin was the structure of choice, not for comfort, but for practicality. Trees were abundant and tools were few. A family might arrive at their chosen plot with little more than an axe, a wagon of supplies, and sheer determination. First, they cleared the land. Then came the notching and stacking of logs, fitted without nails, secured with mud and moss. Roofs were often made of split logs or thatched grass. Windows were rare luxuries. If present, they were small and often covered with greased paper instead of glass. Inside, life was harsh but purposeful. One-room cabins housed entire families, sometimes a dozen people or more, all under the same roof. Privacy was nearly non-existent. Cooking was done over open hearths, and smoke often filled the cramped space. Bedding might be straw stuffed in two. Cloth sacks. Furniture was rough-hewn and homemade. Every item served a function. There was no room for decoration, only survival. But even in these difficult conditions, life began to take shape. Gardens were planted, small livestock raised. Children gathered firewood and fetched water from nearby streams. Women cooked, preserved food, spun cloth, and tended to illness. Men hunted, trapped, built fences, and defended the homestead when necessary. Each season brought new labor, planting, harvesting, chopping wood, preserving food for winter. Rest was rare. Asterisk on the American frontier, nature was both provider and adversary. While the land held the promise of bounty, it offered nothing freely. Every meal, every warm fire, every drop of clean water had to be earned through sweat, skill, and endurance. There were no markets, no electricity, no stocked pantries, only what could be grown, gathered, hunted, or preserved. Food was a daily concern, not a convenience. In the early months of settlement, many families relied on hardtack, salted pork, dried beans, and flour brought from the east. These supplies, though essential, dwindled quickly. The long-term solution was self-sufficiency. Gardens were planted as soon as the ground thawed. Corn, beans, squash, and potatoes were staples. Herbs were grown for both flavor and medicine. Nothing went to waste. A single failed harvest could mean hunger or worse. Meat came from the wilderness. Men and older boys hunted deer, rabbits, wild turkeys, and sometimes larger game like bison. Traps were set for smaller animals. Fishing in nearby creeks provided vital protein, especially during warm months. Every kill was a victory. Every successful forage a small triumph over uncertainty. But nature's gifts came with dangers. Bears, wolves, and mountain lions also roamed. The land and starvation was never far off in a bad season. Preserving food for winter was a skill that meant the difference between comfort and calamity. Smokehouses, root cellars, and drying racks were used to keep meat, vegetables, and fruits edible through the cold months. Women boiled jars of jam, cured pork with salt, and pickled anything that could fit in a barrel. Asterisk firewood was stacked high. By autumn, cords upon cords of it, because once the snow came, going out for more could mean frostbite or worse. The hearth became the heart of the home. Its fire burned day and night, warming the cabin, cooking the food, and offering a fragile sense of normalcy amid the cold. Food preservation was critical. Families who failed to salt enough meat, dry enough vegetables, or store enough grain often went hungry. Root cellars were dug deep, insulated with straw, and stocked with potatoes, onions, and jars of preserves. Meals were simple but hearty. Stews, cornbread, dried fruit, and beans meant to stretch as far as possible. But beyond hunger and cold, loneliness posed its own danger. Weeks might pass without seeing another soul. Snowdrifts made travel nearly impossible. Letters from back east arrived late, if at all. The silence of the woods was profound. For some, especially women and children, the solitude became unbearable. Cabin fever, anxiety, and depression were common. Though rarely spoken of, families passed the time with what they had: storytelling, Bible reading, mending clothes, carving tools, or patching quilts. Children played quietly indoors, learning to entertain themselves without much space or distraction. Every day was measured by the fire's glow and the stores in the cellar. But even in the deepest cold, endurance took root. Winter was a season of waiting for the sun to rise a little earlier, for the snow to melt, for the earth to soften again beneath tired boots. And when spring finally came, with its thawing creeks and returning birds, frontier families emerged from their cabins, thinner but alive. While life on the frontier is often remembered as solitary and rugged, few pioneers truly lived in total isolation. Survival might begin with a single cabin, but over time, scattered homesteads grew into something more: communities bound by necessity, trust, and the shared challenge of taming the land. Neighbors, though distant, were lifelines. In the absence of formal institutions, frontier families relied on one another. Barn raisings, harvests, log rollings, and quilting bees were more than chores. They were social events. A dozen men could raise a structure in a day. Women would prepare food, care for children, and offer news from miles away. These moments built bonds stronger than fences. They made survival a shared effort. Without newspapers, telegraphs, or town criers, news traveled by word of mouth. Traveling trader or a visitor from a nearby settlement could bring stories from hundreds of miles away. Political changes, rumors of war, sightings of native tribes, or news of a harsh winter coming. Such information passed from cabin to cabin like wildfire. When a family received a letter, it was often read aloud multiple times to friends and neighbors, becoming a shared window into the world beyond. Religion played a unifying role. Itinerant preachers, often called circuit riders, traveled long routes, delivering sermons in cabins, barns, or open fields. Families would walk for hours just to attend a Sunday service, turning it into a full-day event of prayer, song, and fellowship. Faith provided comfort and moral structure in a world where law was still taking root. Education was scarce but valued. When enough children lived nearby, families might band together to build a one-room schoolhouse. A young woman or older child might teach, using a Bible, a slate, and whatever few books were available. Community events like spelling bees and holiday gatherings offered rare joy and a sense of normalcy amid the hardships. Life on the frontier was not only a struggle against nature, it was also a collision of peoples, cultures, and claims to the land. As settlers moved westward, they entered territories long inhabited by Native American tribes. For the pioneers, the land was a promise. For indigenous peoples, it was home. The result was a tense, often violent balance between conflict and coexistence. Some encounters were peaceful. Trade was common along major trails. Settlers exchanged metal tools, cloth, or firearms for furs, food, and local knowledge. Native guides sometimes helped families navigate unfamiliar terrain or warned them of incoming storms. There were moments of genuine friendship, shared meals, gifts, and quiet understanding across the cultural divide. But these moments were fragile. and the pressure of expansion would strain them to breaking. As more homesteads appeared, so did tensions over land and resources. Settlers cleared forests, diverted water, hunted game, unaware or indifferent to the fact that these lands were deeply tied to the spiritual, economic, and ancestral life of native nations. Treaties were signed, then broken, promises were made, then ignored. As a result, hostility grew. Raids occurred on both sides. Some settlers feared attacks at night. Homes were fortified. Rifles kept close. Children taught to stay quiet and hidden. Stories of violence, whether exaggerated or true, traveled fast and stoked fear. At the same time, indigenous communities saw their lands shrink, their hunting grounds vanish, and their way of life threatened by unfamiliar laws and permanent fences. Militias were formed. Forts were built. Entire conflicts erupted, from small skirmishes to full-scale wars like the Black Hawk War or the clashes along the Oregon Trail. Some native tribes chose to fight. Others tried diplomacy or moved further west, only to face more settlers in time. There was no simple resolution. Yet, even amid conflict, instances of cooperation endured. Some Native Americans worked alongside settlers, married into families, or converted to Christianity. Some settlers adopted indigenous farming methods, herbal medicine, or winter survival techniques. The frontier was a place of blurred lines. Not always war, not always peace. Asterisk on the American frontier, survival was often credited to grit, strength, and resilience, and no one embodied these traits more quietly and completely than the women of the wilderness. While frontier tales often spotlight men blazing trails or fending off wolves, it was the labor, intelligence, and endurance of women that held frontier life together. Day after grueling day, women wore many roles, often at once. They were mothers, doctors, teachers, farmers, hunters, and protectors, expected to work from sunrise too long after sunset. A pioneer wife might begin her day kindling the fire, milking the cow, and preparing breakfast. From there, she churned butter, mended clothing, tended to children, gathered herbs, and maintained the garden. In emergencies, she delivered babies, dressed wounds, and sat beside the dying with no formal training and often no help. Yet, women were not confined to the home. Many worked the fields beside their husbands, chopped wood, or helped build cabins. Some hunted small game. Others drove wagons during the westward journey, managing oxen and navigating rugged terrain when men were injured or away. When widowed, which was not uncommon, they took on entire homesteads alone, raising children and crops with little more than raw determination. Women also brought culture, learning, and continuity. In isolated regions with no schools, they taught their children to read and write using family Bibles and borrowed books. They kept diaries, wrote letters, and recorded recipes and remedies documents that later became rich historical records. Through them, we see the human side of the frontier, the longing for community, the struggle against loneliness, the quiet pride in a well-baked loaf or a warm quilt. They also formed the spiritual and emotional core of many frontier communities. Women organized prayer meetings, holiday gatherings, and mutual aid networks. When a neighbor was ill, they brought broth and comfort. When a child died, they dug the graves and mourned together. Their strength was not always loud, but it was ever present, steady as the hearth fire. Asterisk for children on the American frontier. Life was not defined by toys or school books, but by responsibility, resilience, and resourcefulness. From an early age, frontier boys and girls were expected to contribute to the family's survival. Childhood was brief and often harsh, shaped by hard labor, long winters, and the ever-present challenges of a wild and changing land. Daily life for frontier children revolved around chores, not play. Boys were taught to chop wood, hunt small game, tend livestock, and protect the homestead. Girls helped with cooking, spinning, milking cows, gardening, and caring for younger siblings. Children as young as 5 had tasks to complete before breakfast. There was little room for idleness when every pair of hands mattered. That said, childhood on the frontier wasn't entirely joyless. Children found time to play with what they had: a rag doll sewn by hand, a carved wooden animal, or a hoop and stick. They invented games using stones, sticks, or imagination, often drawing from stories passed down around the hearth. Social gatherings like harvests or barn dances offered rare chances for fun and interaction with other children, sometimes many miles away. Education was a privilege, not a guarantee. In many regions, there were no schools at all. Where schools did exist, they were often one-room cabins with a single teacher instructing children of all ages. Lessons were short, and school terms were often scheduled around planting and harvest seasons. Books were rare, paper even rarer. Children learned by reciting aloud, writing on slates, and memorizing verses, often from the Bible, despite the hardships. Frontier life instilled values that children carried into adulthood: self-reliance, discipline, thrift, and toughness. Children learned to care for animals, cook meals, and repair tools not for enrichment, but for survival. They witnessed birth, death, and nature's fury up close, often without protection or explanation. These experiences created a maturity far beyond their years. Winter on the American frontier was not a passing season. It was a test of everything a family had prepared for. When the first snow fell, the frontier changed. Trails vanished, rivers froze, trees stood bare, and the wind cut through even the thickest wool. For weeks or even months, isolation became total, and survival depended entirely on what had been done before the cold arrived. Cabins were reinforced. Cracks in the walls were stuffed with moss, clay, or cloth. Firewood was stacked high, cords upon cords of it, because once the snow came, going out for more could mean frostbite or worse. The hearth became the heart of the home. Its fire burned day and night, warming the cabin, cooking the food, and offering a fragile sense of normalcy amid the cold. Food preservation was critical. Families who failed to salt enough meat, dry enough vegetables, or store enough grain often went hungry. Root cellars were dug deep, insulated with straw, and stocked with potatoes, onions, and jars of preserves. Meals were simple but hearty: stews, cornbread, dried fruit, and beans meant to stretch as far as possible. But beyond hunger and cold, loneliness posed its own danger. Weeks might pass without seeing another soul. Snowdrifts made travel nearly impossible. Letters from back east arrived late, if at all. The silence of the woods was profound. For some, especially women and children, the solitude became unbearable. Cabin fever, anxiety, and depression were common. Although rarely spoken of, families passed the time with what they had: storytelling, Bible reading, mending clothes, carving tools, or patching quilts. Children played quietly indoors, learning to entertain themselves without much space or distraction. Every day was measured by the fire's glow and the stores in the cellar. But even in the deepest cold, endurance took root. Winter was a season of waiting for the sun to rise a little earlier, for the snow to melt, for the earth to soften again beneath tired boots. And when spring finally came, with its thawing creeks and returning birds, frontier families emerged from their cabins, thinner but alive. And so, we've journeyed together through the vast landscapes of the American frontier, feeling the harshness, yet also the grace of nature, and witnessing the dreams nurtured in the quiet of new lands. Let these images of cozy log cabins, glowing hearth fires, and resilient people gently lull your mind. Asterisk. The whispers of ancient scrolls and the light of knowledge. Asterisk, asterisk, we've journeyed through wild frontiers, felt the resilience of pioneers, and listened to the echoes of ancient vows. Now, let your mind gently drift to a place where greatness wasn't built with brick and stone or sword, but with scrolls, ideas, and the pure light of knowledge. We will visit ancient libraries where the whispers of the past are preserved, and humanity's wisdom was safeguarded for millennia. Imagine yourself in Alexandria, the dazzling city of ancient Egypt, where the Mediterranean sun cast golden hues upon its paved streets, and the murmur of thousands of languages mingled in the air. This was a bustling hub of commerce, culture, and, above all, a beacon of intellect. And at its heart, standing like a mountain of scrolls, was the great Library of Alexandria. Asterisk, the Library of Alexandria was more than just a building. It was a dream brought to life by the Ptolemaic pharaohs, the successors of Alexander the Great. They envisioned a place where every book, every scroll, every written idea could be found. An unparalleled treasury of knowledge, where scholars from across the known world could gather to learn, debate, and expand the frontiers of understanding. Construction of the library began around the 3rd century BCE. It wasn't merely a standalone library, but part of the Museum Research Institute, a temple of the muses, where poets, philosophers, mathematicians, and astronomers lived, worked, and exchanged ideas. Scholars were salaried, provided with lodging, and given access to an immense collection of documents. This was one of the very first research centers in the world, a place where the pursuit of knowledge was the sole and highest purpose. Picture the grand, expansive corridors, illuminated by natural light filtering through high windows. Cedar wood, shelves, intricately carved, were filled with hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Each scroll was crafted from papyrus or parchment, meticulously handwritten in black ink and carefully preserved in cylindrical cases. Scribes worked tirelessly, copying texts, translating from one language to another, and meticulously categorizing them using a complex system. The library even had a special team of book seekers. They were dispatched throughout the world to seaports, markets, and other libraries with a singular mission: to find and acquire every book imaginable. When a ship docked in Alexandria, all scrolls on board were temporarily confiscated, meticulously copied, and then the copy was returned to the owner, while the original was kept within the library. This was a bold policy, but it helped the library amass an immense collection estimated to be in the hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions, of scrolls. Asterisk, within the walls of the Library of Alexandria, some of the greatest minds of the ancient world converged. Euclid developed his geometry here, laying the foundation for modern mathematics. Eratosthenes calculated the Earth's circumference with astonishing accuracy, simply by using shadows and a bit of deductive reasoning. Erophilus and Erasisteros conducted pioneering research in anatomy and medicine, sometimes through human dissection, a practice forbidden in many other places. Poets like Callimachus compiled book catalogues, creating one of the earliest classification systems. Historians recorded the tales of vanished empires and civilizations. Astronomers mapped the stars and planets, striving to unravel the mysteries of the cosmos. The library was not merely a place to store knowledge, but a place to create new knowledge, life. Within the library unfolded to a peaceful rhythm of learning. Scholars spent hours reading, taking notes, and engaging in lively debates. They strolled through the gardens, contemplating new ideas. They shared meals and animated conversations. In the dining halls, there was none of the clamor of the marketplace or the hurried pace of city life, only the stillness of the scrolls and the quiet whispers of minds at work. The library was also a center of translation. Texts from Egypt, Persia, India, and other cultures were rendered into Greek, enriching the intellectual treasury of the Western world. It was a place where cultures met, where ideas intertwined, and where the understanding of the world expanded. Asterisk, however, even the grandest beacons of knowledge cannot withstand the ravages of time and the shifting tides of empires. The exact fate of the Library of Alexandria remains a mystery. Shrouded in legends and historical debate, some believe the library was destroyed during Julius Caesar's war in 48 BCE, when his fleet was set ablaze in the harbor and the fire spread to the library. Others suggest it was destroyed by Christians in the 4th century CE, as they suppressed pagan beliefs and dismantled temples and libraries. Still others attribute its downfall to the Muslims in the 7th century CE, although historical evidence for this claim is quite weak. Perhaps no single event caused the library's destruction. Instead, it may have simply declined over time, damaged by successive wars, earthquakes, neglect, and changes in political and religious attitudes. Scholars departed, scrolls were lost or damaged, and the museum gradually lost its support. Whatever the cause, the disappearance of the Library of Alexandria was a monumental loss for humanity. Thousands, perhaps even millions, of scrolls containing the knowledge and wisdom of the ancient world vanished forever. We can only imagine what was lost: literary masterpieces, scientific breakthroughs, and historical records that we will never know. Nevertheless, the legacy of the Library of Alexandria endures. It inspired other libraries and centers of learning throughout the ancient and medieval worlds. It became a symbol of the pursuit of knowledge, of the importance of preserving wisdom, and of the enduring power of ideas. Even in its absence, the library still whispers a reminder of the value of knowledge and its fragility. Asterisk from Alexandria. Let your mind wander to other ancient libraries, places that also served as beacons of knowledge, though perhaps not as grand, yet no less significant. Think of the Library of Pergamum in Asia Minor, a rival to Alexandria, famed for its development of parchment as a writing material alternative to papyrus. Parchment was more durable, could be written on both sides, and revolutionized book production. This library also stood as an important center of scholarship, where academics studied philosophy, literature, and science. Or the Library of Celsus in Ephesus, a Roman library built as a monumental tomb for a Roman governor. Though much smaller than Alexandria, it is a beautiful example of Roman library architecture, with an ornate facade and niches designed to hold scrolls. It was not just a place for reading, but also a public space for contemplation and social interaction. And remember the smaller libraries, the private collections of Greek philosophers, the scrolls kept within Egyptian temples, or the vast compilations of ancient Chinese scholars. Each scroll was a voice from the past, an idea preserved across time. Each library was a sanctuary for intellect, a quiet space where the mind could wander and learn. These libraries, whether now lost to time or standing as eloquent ruins, continue to whisper stories of dedication to knowledge, of minds that strived to comprehend the world, and of the enduring resilience of human ideas. They serve as a reminder that even amidst periods of turmoil, there have always been places for stillness, for learning, and for the illumination of knowledge. Let the images of ancient scrolls, tranquil corridors, and the soft light of wisdom gently lull your mind. Let the whispers of scholars long past guide your slumber, leading you into a world where knowledge is eternal and peace reigns. You have survived. You have danced, poured tea, smiled through centuries of geisha tradition, and avoided tripping in okobo sandals long enough to reach the unspoken chapter in every geisha story. The secret no one tells you is this: geisha don't truly retire. Not in the traditional sense. There's no ceremony where someone hands you a golden fan and a thank you note. You don't get a pension. You simply fade gradually from the spotlight, like a candle burned all the way down. Some geisha transition into teachers. You become the one correcting someone's bowing angle with a single glance. You demonstrate the shamisen for the 100th time, knowing full well the mako in front of you is thinking about lunch. You've become the legacy, the living proof that grace ages well and outlives fashion. Others become house mothers, Okasan, yes, her. The woman who once judged your bow like a criminal offense, and now it's you standing by the sliding door, inspecting. The new shikomi with the expression of someone wondering if the rice pot is burning. You run the house, you make the rules, and you decide who rises and who cleans the entryway again until they learn how to walk without sounding like a stampede. Some geisha marry discreetly, strategically, perhaps even to a former dana who is still breathing and has the good manners, not to ask what everything costs. You trade one form of performance for another, the art of smiling through domesticity. But many geishas simply continue slower, quieter, but still sharp. You host more intimate gatherings. You become less about performance and more about presence. You say less, but it means more. Your nod can shift the tone of a room. Your absence becomes noticeable. There's no grand exit, no final curtain call. You simply shift into shadow, still wrapped in silk, still moving like a poem with ankles. And even when your public appearances grow rare, your name endures, passed on by younger geisha who still practice the gestures you perfected long ago. By now, your knees are permanently shaped like tatami mats. Your back straightens on instinct. Your voice, always melodic, holds weight. Not because it's loud, but because it rarely needs to be. You are no longer just a geisha. You are memory made visible. You won't find your name carved in stone or printed in textbooks. You won't trend. There's no viral clip of you pouring tea with surgical elegance or reciting waka poetry between shamisen chords. But your legacy isn't the kind that needs volume. It lives in the next girl, kneeling too long on aching legs, trying not to smudge her lip paint as she perfects a half smile that hides exhaustion and radiates charm. It lives in the way the fan opens, crisp, precise, and silent a gesture older than most empires. It lives in the quiet spaces between words at a party where your presence still shifts the atmosphere. Even if no one remembers your debut date or the name of the client who bought your first seasonal comb. Your job was never to be loud. It was to be unforgettable in ways most people wouldn't know how to explain, to captivate, not seduce, to suggest, not declare, to turn a dinner into a ceremony and a glance into a statement. And through it all, you survived. You survived the training, the weight of tradition, the shoes that tried to kill you. You survived assumptions, competition, the clients who mistook performance for permission, and the rumors that never seemed to fade as fast as they were invented. But most of all, you survived elegantly in a world that demanded perfection and silence. You created space for self-possession. You carved out a life that was both performance and resistance, all while never raising your voice. And maybe no one will say your name out loud when they tell the story of Kyoto, but someone will. Sip tea just so. Someone will walk in kimono without rustling. Someone will smile with an unreadable gaze and say, just enough and not a word more, and in that moment you'll still be there. Not as a ghost, but as legacy. Background sound, distant wind slowly fades. The gentle sound of flowing water also gradually disappears into silence. A long, deep pause. We have journeyed together through the currents of time, listening to the whispers from worlds long asleep, from the hidden refinement of the Geisha to the marriage vows woven from duty and sanctity in ancient civilizations, from the silent form of the magnificent Malberg Castle, a witness to history, to the call of the wild frontier and the resilient dreams of pioneers in America, and finally to the echoes of ancient scrolls and the light of knowledge in libraries. Long lost, each story is a thread, weaving the grand tapestry of the past. We don't need to comprehend every detail, every battle, or every name. The important thing is to feel their existence, the enduring resilience of humanity, and the hidden beauty within each historical moment. Let these whispers fill the space. In your mind, carrying the peace of millennia gone by, background sound, the flowing water fades completely. Only the very soft sound of wind remains, then slowly dissipates into absolute silence. A long, deep pause. Now, as our journey comes to an end, let these images, sounds, and sensations gently carry you into a deep sleep. Allow yourself to drift into the tranquility of the night, where history is no longer a burden, but a soft, soothing lullaby. Let your mind rest, sinking into the peaceful darkness of ancient memories. Sleep well, very well.